Ellen. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be making an Artisan sourdough bread loaf, but we're only making one. A lot of the common sourdough bread recipes always make 2 loaves, and so today I'm giving you guys a recipe to just make one. And I know why people make 2 at a time, because the process takes 2 days. It's kind of complicated, and why not just make 2 to, you know, save time? And that does work for larger families, but for us, it's just me and Danny. So if we make 2, we either have to give one away or it's going to mold within a couple days and it kind of just goes to waste. So I don't want to do that. So we are just going to be making one, and that will be enough for us to eat for a whole week. And if we keep it in the fridge, it won't go moldy on us. Now, I have made so many sourdough bread recipes, and this one is by far my favorite. It comes out good every single time. There's so many different methods you can do to make this sourdough artisan loaf, and different order that you put the ingredients in. And I just really like this one. It's so easy. It's only 4 ingredients, and like I said, comes out great every time. Another great thing about this recipe is you don't need a mixer. So you don't need a stand mixer, which I know not everybody has. I do have a KitchenAid mixer, and let me tell you, I love it. But for this recipe, you don't need it. So almost anybody can make this type of sourdough loaf if you have a sourdough starter that is nice and active and bubbly, because that is honestly the key to making a successful loaf of sourdough bread. So if you want to make this recipe, go ahead and take your starter, pull it out of the fridge if it was in the fridge, set it on the counter for a few hours to let it really bubble up and get nice and active and up to room temp before you use it. And after it is nice and active, you will take 125 grams of the starter and put it in a large bowl, along with 368 grams of filtered water. And you mix those 2 together in a bowl, and you mix them together until it almost looks like milky, cloudy substance. And then after that is nice and mixed, you're going to add 500 grams of an unbleached all-purpose flour. I use the King Arthur brand, and I get the 12-pound bag from Costco. It's really nice and big because I do make a lot of bread, and it lasts me more than 2 weeks. Whereas a normal sized flour that you can get from Walmart wouldn't last me. So I get mine from Costco. I would love to eventually get a grain mill where I can mill my own grain and get my own flour, but for now we're just using the King Arthur brand, which is good for me right now, so that's what I'm using. Pour your flour into the bowl, and you're going to want to mix it together. I like to start by mixing this with a spatula, but then there comes a point where you can't really mix it anymore with the spatula, and then I will go in with my hands to just really get in there and make sure that those 3 ingredients are really nice and incorporated. And then after they are incorporated, you will let it sit with a tea towel over it for 30 minutes. And this is that auto lace time, and this time just gives the flour and the water and the starter to just incorporate. And I really don't know the science behind it, but I know that it does make a difference in the final outcome. So don't skip this 30-minute resting period. While the dough is resting, this is a great time to feed your starter too. After it has sat for 30 minutes, you're going to want to add the remaining 25 grams of water. And 12 grams of sea salt. Now, don't use table salt. It's just not a good quality salt, and it's just better to use a sea salt. And I personally use a pink Himalayan salt. I just think it has better minerals for you, and it tastes better in my opinion as well. So that is the kind of salt that is recommended. Now, after you add the water and the salt, you are going to use your hands to mix it together, and you're almost going to be kind of kneading the bread, but not like an intense knead like you would for other breads. You're just kind of incorporating the salt and the water together, and at this point the dough will start to really come together, nice and ready for the stretch and folds. Incorporating the salt and water, you're going to want to let it sit for around 15 to 30 minutes. And after that time is up, you're gonna perform your first set of stretch and folds. Now, stretching and folding is where you take one side of the loaf, you pull it up as high as it can go, and you just fold it down. Turn the bowl a quarter turn and do the same thing on that side, and just keep turning it a quarter turn each time. Think of the dough like it's a square, so you're folding each side of that square just over itself. It's really quite a simple process. Before doing your stretch and folds, I recommend getting your hands wet underneath the faucet, because this will make the dough not stick to your hands. It'll make it so much easier for you to pull up that dough and fold it down. Just do this once before each set of stretch and folds. So you're going to perform 3 to 4 stretch and folds. I always do 4, and this will be over the course of like 2 hours with 30 minutes in between each set of stretch and folds. The stretching and folding is what makes those big, nice bubbles that you see in sourdough bread. Or they're not really bubbles, they're more like holes that you see in the bread, and it just gives air in them, makes them nice, light, and bouncy when they come out of the oven. After your 3 to 4 stretch and folds, you are going to let the dough sit in a warm place until it has doubled in size. And this could be anywhere from 6 hours to 8 hours. It really just depends on how hot or how not hot your room is. If I'm kind of in a hurry and I want my bread to rise quicker, I'll put it in the upstairs of my house with a small space heater on, just to make the room a little bit warmer for the bread. And I find that if I do that, the bread is ready within 6 hours. But you could just sit it out on the counter and give it 8 hours to rise. If you have an active bubbly starter from the start, your bread will double in size. This is seriously the key to the rising of your bread. When I first started my sourdough starter, I prematurely jumped into making sourdough bread, and my bread really wasn't rising the way it was supposed to because my starter wasn't active enough to be making bread right off the bat. So if you can get your starter from a friend who has an established, mature starter, you're going to have a lot more success than you would just like starting from scratch. I did start mine from scratch because I have a do-it-yourself kind of mentality when it comes to a lot of things. So that's why I did it. But I'm honestly glad I did it to learn how to do it. And I have had my starter for over 3 months now, and it's really nice and bubbly and active. But it wasn't always. I had to feed my starter one time. I only had to do it once with rye flour because I read somewhere that if you feed it with rye flour, it will like blow up and just be so bubbly and it'll double in size every single time. And sure enough, it did. After that one feeding with rye flour, it was like good to go forever. It actually overflowed on my counter twice. So if you have a starter that is not doubling in size after each feeding, I would definitely recommend feeding it one time with rye flour, and it should perk up like no other. After your dough has doubled in size, you're going to dump it out on the counter, and you can put flour down on the counter to help the bread not stick to the counter. I personally do this, it makes it a lot easier to work with as well. So dump the dough onto the counter, press it down with your fingers into either like a square or rectangular shape, and then just roll the dough up like in a log kind of. Then you're gonna push the sides underneath the bottom of the bread to create more of a circle shape. After you've rolled it up and made that circle shape, this is the part where you're going to add tension to the loaf. Now, adding tension is what makes it more round and springy and bouncy and just a really good shaped loaf, which is what you want. So the way you add tension is you are going to push the bread away from you on the counter and then just like pull it back towards you. And you're just gonna push and pull about 4 times, and you'll see that tension is being added right away. If you're doing it properly, which is actually really easy to do, anybody can do this. So pushing and pulling, and you can even like rotate it in a circle as you're pushing and pulling. After you have added tension in your loaf, flip it upside down into your banneton basket, which is what I use, but you can also just use a regular bowl lined with a tea towel. That works just fine too. And you're going to create a seam on the bottom of the loaf. This is just folding the dough like over top of each other. Some people do like a zigzag pattern just to create a nice seam at the bottom. One of my must-have tools for making bread is a bench scraper, and these, I can't live without this. It's such a nice tool. You just like scoop it off the counter and you can like fold the bread into the basket. So definitely pick up one of these if you don't have one. Once your dough is in the basket, you can put a plastic bag or plastic wrap over it. I use plastic bag, it's really easy. Now this is so you don't dry out the bread when it's in the refrigerator. So tie the basket together, tie the plastic together and stick it in the fridge. And I like to put it in the fridge for at least 4 hours. You can do this overnight as well, but if you want bread, if you want bread the same day, you definitely could if you started early in the morning. But definitely keep that bread in the fridge for at least 4 hours, because it'll just be easier to score when you take it out. If you don't keep it in for at least 4 hours, your scoring will be definitely subpar. So after the dough has been in the fridge, either overnight or however long you chose to keep it in there, put a piece of parchment paper down on the counter, flip the dough with the seam side down, and this is when you're going to score your bread. This is the fun part, and you can get really creative with different designs with scoring the bread. And when you're scoring, you can just use a regular razor blade. This is probably the easiest to use, a regular razor blade. And you can look up different patterns on how to score sourdough bread. There's so many different ways that you can do it. I just like to do like a basic half moon or just like a crisscross down the center, just so that the bread expands in the oven and opens up and gives you nice like crunch to the outside of it. Preheat your oven to 500 degrees and place a cast iron Dutch oven inside of the oven with nothing in it to preheat before you put the loaf into the Dutch oven. The preheating is crucial to have the nice crust on the outside of the bread, so do not skip this part. After the Dutch oven has been preheating in the oven a while, some people say 30 minutes, but honestly, just use your best judgment. If it's been in there for a while, you're probably good to go. So you're going to place the bread on top of the parchment paper inside of the Dutch oven, put the lid on. In the first 20-25 minutes, you're gonna keep the lid on in the oven. And then after that 20 to 25 minutes is up, take off the lid in the oven and cook it for another 20 minutes. After I take the lid off, I like to bring the oven down to 450 just so it doesn't get too crunchy on the outside and I don't want it to burn or anything. So I bring it down to 450. Some people cook their loaves at 450 for the whole time, which you definitely can do. I just find that my oven runs a little cold. It's weird, like I have to raise the oven temp in order for things to cook all the way through, and I honestly have to keep things longer in my oven. I don't know why, it's just always been like that. But if you know your oven runs hot, or if you know that it's gonna burn, just keep it at 450. You know your oven, so use your best judgment with that. Now, after the 40 to 45 minutes total cook time is done, pull it out of the oven. I take off the lid at this point, or I keep the lid off at this point and let it cool down for at least an hour. Even after an hour, the bread is still really warm, but do not cut into it before an hour because it's still cooking outside of the oven. So just let it sit for at least an hour before cutting into it. And that is it. You have made your loaf of artisan sourdough bread, and you get to enjoy this goodness that you just made. This bread is the absolute best. It is gut healthy. It's filled with probiotics. It's not gonna upset your stomach like a traditional bread from the store would. That's why I love sourdough, because my mom, who is gluten intolerant, can tolerate this bread, and honestly it tastes way better than store-bought bread. We like to make breakfast sandwiches with it, sandwiches with lunch meat. We like to dip it in olive oil with some spices, or put tapenade on it, or peanut butter and jelly, or just eat it with plain butter. It's so good. There's so many ways that you can eat it. We will sometimes just have it as a side dish with meals like chili or soup, or just honestly anything. A carb that you don't have to feel like guilty about eating, and you know it's not going to give you a raging stomach ache after eating it. Now, of course, this was just making one sourdough loaf. If you wanted to make two, you would always double the recipe, and it's super simple to double it. And you would just split the dough in half after the bulk rise and just make two loaves. No big deal. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you guys are gonna try this recipe. I don't want you to feel intimidated on making the bread. It's not that complicated when you think about it. And after the first time you make one, you're gonna say, wow, that actually wasn't that bad at all. and just follow the recipe to a T. You will be fine and it will come out great. And even if it doesn't come out great, you can always turn the bread into croutons or breadcrumbs. So it's not gonna be a waste either way. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and comment below if you are going to try this recipe, or if you have and if you enjoyed it. I would love to hear your feedback. Also, let me know in the comments if you would like to see more sourdough recipes. I've been experimenting a lot with sourdough and it's been so fun. My husband and I have gotten to eat all my creations and fresh bread every single week. There is nothing like it. I truly don't think I'll ever go back to buying bread from the store. I made homemade hamburger buns last night, and I've been making brioche for French toast and dinner rolls and sourdough cornbread, sourdough cookies, everything, and it's been so fun. It's been fun experimenting with a new ingredient. So I hope you guys enjoy this kind of content. That's it, guys. I will see you in my next video.